Hey, welcome back to another episode. Today I wanted to revisit one of the first videos on this channel, which was connecting a .NET app to a MySQL database, and we used Pomelo's Entity Framework core NuGet package. I wanted to revisit that video mainly because of the fact that .NET 5 is here, and also wanted to address a couple of comments on that video, like how do I write tests, or how do I write migrations. So we're going to build an entire sample countries sort of app. I'll show you what it is. And the idea is to go through all the different steps of creating this project and also give it a facelift for 2021. I think it's been almost 3 years since that video came out. So yeah, let's get started. As usual, we're going to begin with an empty directory, and let's create so you see I've already created that project before. This is probably the second time I'm recording this. I had a couple of glitches, but it is what it is. So I'm going to create a .NET solution first, which is .NET new SLN, and the name of the project is countries. The project we're trying to build is basically a CLI app, and we have two entities. One is a country, one is a continent. A continent can have many countries, and the idea is to create separate projects for your data models, your tests, and the actual CLI app. But yeah, we're going to have like a very basic query on the countries, get the list of countries, and that's pretty much it. And we'll also use the Pomelo Entity Framework code. That's the provider from MySQL. So yeah, so the solution is created. Now let's create a class library for our data project, which is going to house the data models and the DbContext to connect to the database. So we have countries.data, which is the name of the project. Now I'm going to add that project to my solution, which is that. And let's open up the data project, and we're going to create the entities first. So let's delete the class1 file, and let's create these data models in a folder called models. The first one is, let's do continent. So this is countries .data.models, and the name of the class is continent. So I'm going to be using GUIDs for the ID, and we have the name of the continent, and let's just keep track of when this row got added with a property called created at. I'm going to have to add the using statement for system. And what else? Yeah, I think this is pretty much it. Let's add a navigation property of type iCollection, which comes from system collections generic, of type country, which we're going to create right now. And this is going to refer to all the countries in this continent. So let's create country.cs. This is also in the same namespace. So countries.data.models. And again, this is also going to have an ID. This is going to have name of the country, and also a datetime field to see when this row was created. And again, I'm going to have to add the using statement. And let's get a back navigation property back to the continent itself. And the proper foreign keys will get added by themselves. So that is that. Now let's add a data context, or rather a DbContext, to connect to the database and create programmatically our tables. So I'm going to call it countries context.cs, and I'm fine with putting that at the root of the project. So that's the namespace countries context. And since this is a DbContext, this has to inherit from DbContext. It actually comes from Microsoft.entity framework core. So we're going to have to add that NuGet package, which is .NET add package Microsoft.entity framework core. And now all we need to do is add the constructor. And the way to tell this DbContext how to connect to a database, that logic is going to be at the CLI app level, or if you're using this in a web API, it's going to be on the web API project. So to pass in those options, we have to send an argument of type DbContext options, which also comes from entity framework core. It is generic with the countries context type, and all I need to do is pass it to my base class, which is the DbContext itself. I'm going to add the tables later, or let's just add it now, and I'll come back to this. So the first thing is a countries. The second one is the continent, and this is using countries data and models. I'm going to comment this for now, and I'll tell you why that is. So our data project is basically ready. Now we need to write some migrations, right, to actually apply these programmatically written classes to our database. For that, we need MySQL server first. If you have MySQL installed, that's great. You can do that that way, but I am going to do it through Docker Compose. So I'm just going to write the Docker Compose file real quick. This is going to be countries, and let me know if you want a series on Docker. That would be really fun to do as well. So I need the MySQL image. Latest one is 8.0, I think. And what else? So I need to expose the port from the container to my host. So that's that. I also need to pass in some environment variables, mainly the MySQL root password, the MySQL user, the MySQL password, and the MySQL database. And this is specific for the Docker image for MySQL. If you're using your I'm not entirely sure how you do it without Docker, so I always just create a quick container and do it. But yeah, if you're using something like a separate app to do this, just get your values right. So by the way, if you notice, I've written $signs in front of all of this, which means I'm going to pass those in from my environment variable. So let me open this folder right here, and because I've specified that I'm going to get these from my env, so what I'm going to do is whoops. So I'm going to create not that env rc, and I've made a video about this as well. So this is a package called direnv, which is direnv. So let me just do that. So I just need to pass the values that I want. So for the root password, I'm just going to call it as root password, because these are development values. That doesn't really matter. On your production, probably generate these values or write good passwords. The username of the thing is going to be countries admin. The password is going to be countries pass, I guess. And let's just create the countries as the DB. So now if I open my terminal, the direnv will tell me to do an allow. So now these have been injected. There's a video called CLI config if you're looking for how to set this up. It's in the playlist, same playlist, Weekend Tech. So okay, so now I've set up my database with Docker Compose. I'm going to do a Docker Compose up detached, and we'll just wait for that to start up. And I'm just going to attach the logs to see if it is ready or not. And by then we can do some other stuff. So let this start. I'm going to just keep it here. So what I need to do is I need to somehow write migrations for these tables that we've created, right? We could write them by hand, but a better option would be to generate them, which EF core has support for. So let's create a new console app called countries.migrations. And what I can do is I need to refer to the, well, let's first add it to our solution. Cool. So now we need to refer to the database context from the migrations project. I'm going to add a reference to that. But first, let's go to the migrations project. So I've added a reference to the data project in my migrations. Now, if you want to interact with your database and do apply migrations on all of that stuff, there's a tool called dotnet-ef. So I need to install that, which requires me to create a manifest first. Manifests are like package JSON in Node.js, but they only store development time packages, not runtime. So because this is like a tool only required at development time. So I'm going to create a new tool manifest, and if you say this folder gets created, should have done this at the root. So I'm just going to move it. So here, and now I can do .NET-EF migrations add. I'm just going to do an init, and that's why I commented those tables. I want an empty migration first. So a couple of errors, right? Could not execute because the specified command. Let's just install it again at the root. Cool. And now let me go back to migrations, and I'm going to try doing the migration again. Now it's trying to find any database context in the migrations project, but there isn't any. So also it requires us to add this package, which is Entity Framework Core Design. So let's do that. So now if I try to run the migrations again, it's again will try to find any DbContext, and there are none because our DbContext is in the data project. So what we need to do is, so the way to tackle this is to create something called as apply, or rather implement an interface called iDesignTime DbContext Factory. So let's create one for our countries. So countries context, countries design time DbContext Factory. That's a mouthful, but that's what it is. And this is going to be countries.migrations. And let me add the using statement first. I'm going to refresh VS Code once, just to make sure that IntelliSense starts working. So this was iDesignTime DbContext Factory, which comes from, oh, it comes from design. Makes sense. So now if I implement this, and it is generic, so we need to pass in the countries context. if I implement this, it's going to have one method which returns the country context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the country's context here. And if you remember, we need to pass our DbContext options. So let's create that. To do that, we need to create something called as an options builder, which is of type DbContext options builder, and it is generic. So based on your context. Now we need to tell this that we want to use MySQL. So this is a good time to install the Pomelo package, pomelo.nd framework core.mysql. So that will give us an extension method on this, and we can pass in our connection string, and we also need to pass the MySQL server version. The reason I'm creating variables is because I'm going to get this from environment variables. So which is environment dot, let's do that, add a using statement to system, that's where environment is, get environment variable and the name of the environment variable. So I'm going to add these environment variables in my envrc. The first one is countries design time connection string, and I know that I want one for the real one, so I'm going to name that and countries MySQL version. This is 8.0, and this is going to be host equals localhost because I exposed that port. The port is default, so I don't need to change anything there. This is countries admin, the password is countries pass, and the database is countries. And because these are going to be same for both, I'm just going to write that here. Because my envrc changed, I need to do that, and now that has also been injected into the env. So now all I need to do is write the right key here, paste that, paste that. Now our DB is ready, and we need to get the options from the options builder. So it's the options property, and also need to return that. Cool. So now if we try doing the same thing again, which is trying to add an empty migration, this should work, but there's one little thing that we need to take care of. So the issue is .NET doesn't like us when we try to add our migrations in a different project than where our DbContext is. So my target project, which is migrations, doesn't match my migration assembly, the data. So what it is telling us to do is either put them in the same project, in the same assembly, or tell us through an options, which is here. So here I can do options dot migrations assembly as countries dot migrations. That's where we want our migrations. So with that, we should be able to generate our migration. So if you see, this migration folder got created, and this doesn't really have much, basically setting only the char set will be fine. So now what I'm going to do is go back to our countries context, uncomment that. Oops, don't change that. And now I'm going to create a new migration called create country and continent tables, and wait for that to create a new migration. And now if you see, this is creating the continent, all the properties, the indices, the country, everything is ready. If I, by the way, is that MySQL? Yeah, so the MySQL server is ready. I do docker ps. So this is my container. I want to check what's available there. So let's do that. And I'm going to log into it. Countries pass. So if I show databases, there's only one database there, the countries. But if I just use that DB and show tables, it should be empty because we've not actually. Oh, did we update the migrations as well? Not entirely sure. Anyway, we can drop those. Not sure if this is from the previous run that I did, but yeah, I'm fine with deleting these. Or let me do one thing. I'm going to use the information schema, and I'm going to drop the database itself. Cool. So now if I show databases, there's no database. I'm going to do .NET EF database. Let's see what our options we have. One we have drop and the other one is update. We might have to create the database by ourselves, not entirely sure. So let's try database update. Okay, so it also creates the database by itself. Cool. So the database has got created. Now if I do databases, the database has been created, and I can also do show tables, and I can describe the exact table and all of that. So yeah, that's great. There's one thing that I want to change is I want to make this plural, and I'm going to delete. Yeah, let's just delete those. Not sure if I should have deleted this as well. Yeah, I need to delete that as well. Now if I do create again, I should have probably deleted the database as well, but yeah, let's see what happens. Yeah, so we need to drop this because we're making weird state changes, right? So I'm going to drop the DB and then just run the migrations from the top again. And I want to do a describe on this. So I've renamed this with S. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the migrations project. We have migrations ready. So now all the changes to our models are codified into these classes, which are auto-generated. So that's great. So now we need to create things called as repositories, which are actually classes that query our database through the database context. I'm going to put that in the data project itself. For this project though, we're just going to create one called as a country repo, and let's put it in the countries.data.repos namespace with the name as countries repo. And ideally you'd create interfaces and then implement those in your repos, but since this is only a very small project, I'm not going to do that. If you add interfaces, it's easy to mock them in your unit tests, but for now I think I can live with this. So I'm going to return a task of myQueryable, and there's a very specific reason why I'm doing this. Let me just write a basic method. So get countries async, or get countries with continent, because it's a navigation property. For now, I'm just going to throw a not implemented exception. And add the using system threading tasks and system link. So this is also for country. So this is the basic repository method, just going to get the countries with continent. And the reason I want to return iQueryable is because of the way I'm going to write tests for repositories. So because the job of repositories is to only query data on your database context, what we can do is we can write snapshot tests on top of your repos to check if the query that is getting executed is right. So that's why I'm going to use iQueryable, and let's do a round of 3D to see how I'm going to do this. I'm not entirely sure if this is the standard practice, but I really prefer this method. I'm going to create a new project, and this is going to be a project of type xunit, and going to name that as countries.data.tests, and also going to add that to my solution. So my tests is in my solution. I'm going to rename this to countries repo tests. And I'm also going to use the same method name, because each method is essentially going to have just one test, because it's a snapshot test, right? So that's one. Now what I want to do is I have to get the countries repo somehow. So let's get it in the constructor. And obviously you can set up dependency injection in your xunit test. But for the sake of this project, let's not do that. So countries repo, and this is also going to have to refer to the data project, right? So I'm going to add the reference of countries.data in my tests project. So now I can do that. And I might have to reload VS Code because it sometimes acts very weird. So once that's done, I'm going to create the countries repo as a read-only field. Now in my test, also need to add the using statement here first. Add a test for the countries. Await with countries repo. Need to add the using statement and that. So we have our code ready, or rather the test ready. Let's do watch test and see what happens. Obviously it should fail. We threw an exception inside the function, and that's what happened. That's great. So the first round of 3D is done. Now what I want to do is I want to check the rather let's just fix the error, right? So this is going to be, if I just return a task.from result, if I just create a list here and do as queryable, see what happens. So this test won't fail now. It passed because there's nothing after this test, right? So this got an empty list as a queryable. So now to do the snapshot testing, I'm going to stop this. What I'm going to do is add this package in my test called as snapshooter.xunit, and this will allow me to write snapshot tests. So wait for that to finish. So now if I do snapshot, which is using snapshots snapshooter.xunit dot match, I can pass in a value, and that is what's going to be written in the snapshot files. So if you've not worked with snapshot tests, what it means is you pass something to the match function. If the test hasn't been run before, it is going to write the value that it gets into a file, and the test passes. Now, if you run the test again later and that value doesn't change, your test will pass. If the value changes, that's called a mismatch, and the difference will be shown to you in the test, and the test will fail. Once the test fails, you can decide whether to fix your code and to keep that value that got printed. You want to preserve that value, or you could just delete the file, the snapshot file, and make the new value as your correct value. So I'll explain that. So right now we don't have any tests. We don't have any snapshot files. So if I do countries.toQuery string, which is from EF core, this will give me the actual query that is getting run. We've not used EF core in the repository, by the way, till now. If I show you the snapshot file that got generated right now, this is it. The given iQueryable does not support generation of query strings. That's because we didn't actually use EF core. It's just a regular iQueryable, right? So there's no query string. So that means our snapshot is wrong. So that means we can fix the code. Obviously, the first thing that we need to do is pass our context through the constructor. So I'm going to pass the countries context here. This dot countries context equals that. Now to create a read-only field. And now what I can do is I'm going to do the actual query. So this is countries context dot countries, and can I do include on this? Not sure. I want to, by the way, order by name, right? So I'll do that as well. So order by P or country, that's that, country dot name. So that's that. And now I can do an include, and I'm going to include the font in it as well. So that's my query. And what else? What's missing? So this is includable queryable. So it's just to as queryable. So now we're returning the actual query. So if we go back to this is failing because this requires the database context. So let's create one here. Countries context equals new countries context. And remember, we need the DbContext options. So we're going to create the options builder again. Of the same type. And you might be wondering, do we need database at the test level? Well, no, we don't need to actually connect to real database when testing, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use MySQL, for which I'm going to have to install that package. But I'm just going to pass a hoax, a dummy value here, and then a new MySQL server version. You could get these values from env, but just for easier understanding, I'm just going to put the value directly there. So now I can pass in my context. So now the test should again fail, but the reason for that is because the snapshot changed. So this is our new snapshot. So if you see the folder where all the snapshots are, there's a new mismatch file, and that has the new updated snapshot. And this looks like exactly what we wanted. we're selecting the fields from our country and the continent and doing a left join and ordering by the name of the country, which is exactly what you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all of those files and just going to save the test again so that it runs. And now the test passed and we have the correct snapshot. So that's our repository ready. So now we can create a CLI app around this. And obviously we're just going to do a .NET new console and let's call it countries. That should be fine. And I need to add it to my solution. Cool. Because this is .NET 5, I'm going to write a top level program. I'm going to delete all of that. And I'm going to reuse most of the code from my migrations project, which is creating the context. And obviously you could use dependency injection for this, which if you're interested, I also want to learn it more. So I probably will be making a video on it sometime. But yeah, for now, this should be good. So we have the database context. I'm going to create the countries repo. Which requires the countries context. I need to add a couple of using statements, so let me just reload this. And if you know why this VS Code behaves this way, sometimes the IntelliSense doesn't work. Let me know in the comments. That would be really helpful. I'm having to restart VS Code a lot of times. So using system. For this, this also requires DbContext options builder. So I'm going to add the the entity framework core package. In the right directory. So that's done. And also requires the Pomelo entity framework core. Also need to add the using statement for countries dot data. Oh, I forgot to add the reference. That's why it wasn't working. So I'm going to add the reference to data project in my CLI app. So that's that. Now if I just do console.writeLine of countries repo.get, I need to add a using statement for this. Get countries async, await it, and if I do to list, just from system link, and if I do a count, that should give me 0. Yeah, so let's try to run that. I'm sure there are going to be a couple of issues, but let's see. It did work. So it tried to fetch the values from our DB, but our DB is empty. So we got 0 values. Let's insert some values here. Oops, not that. Yeah, here. So show the tables again. Yeah, let's insert something into continents. It is insert into continents values. First is a UUID, the name of the continent, and the creation time. So now, yep. So that's done. Let's see. Okay, so that got added. If I describe countries, I need to add the UUID, which is that. Is that the name of the country now, and the value of the ID of the continent, which is this. So if I do that and do a select star from countries, we have the country as well. Now if I run this again, this should give us 1. And it does. It's actually print the country. And yeah, we could use a JSON serializer to see the exact value. So I have the countries here. Let's create a JSON string, which is JSON serializer dot serialize the countries, and I'm going to use a couple of options, which is right indented as true. Is there anything else? Yeah, I think this much is fine. So that's done. Now if I print countries JSON string, let's see what happens. So something broke, right? So the reason for this is there are cyclic dependencies. I know there are loops in our so something broke, right? And the reason for this is because there are loops in our JSON. Countries has continent, and then continents again has countries. So what we can do is we can ignore one of them, and I think this also has something like a cycle, a loop. Forgot what the property was, but yeah, you can do that probably with max depth. Let's just see if we can fix it with max depth. So let's do a max depth of 2 and see what happens. But yeah, we have a cycle, right? So I don't think it can fix it. Forgot the property. For now, what I can do is I can go to my models, and I'm going to ignore this countries, because anyway we don't have this. This should have been empty. But yeah, let's try that again. So yeah, now you see we have the country, the attached continent, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's how you write a top level program, which is really exciting with .NET 5, to connect to a MySQL database with Pomeleo's Entity Framework core. I hope most of your comments were addressed, but if not, yeah, be sure to add them in this one, and I'll try to create like a smaller specific video for those comments. And yeah, give a like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Really helps out. And yeah, we'll see you soon. Later.